Who cares about what happened to a girl like you? Even if you die, no one will ask about you." Tina sneered at her niece. The night was cold, and the rain poured in furious waves against the old, rusted rooftop. A little girl, no more than 10 years old, sat huddled in a corner of a small, dimly lit room. Her tiny hands clutched the soaked wrapper around her fragile body as she stared at her mother, who lay motionless on a thin, tattered mat. "Sandra," the weak voice of the dying woman barely rose above the sound of the rain. "Mama, please don't leave me," Sandra sobbed, crawling closer to her mother. Her mother, Mary, lifted a trembling hand and placed it on Sandra's cheek. "Be strong, my child. The world is cruel, but you must fight." Her voice cracked, and a violent cough shook her frail body. "Mama, I will be good. I will take care of you. Please don't go," Sandra begged, tears rolling down her face. A deep silence fell over the room. The woman's hand, which had rested on Sandra's cheek, slowly slipped away. "No, no, Mama. Please wake up," Sandra screamed, shaking her mother's lifeless body. But there was no response. Her mother was gone. The small house erupted with wails as the neighbors rushed in. Some tried to pull Sandra away, but she fought them, clinging onto her mother's body, shaking her, screaming for her to wake up. The neighbors whispered among themselves, pitying the little girl who had just lost the only person in the world who loved her. By the next morning, Mary's body was buried in a shallow grave behind their house, and Sandra stood in the rain, staring at the wet ground that had swallowed her mother. She had no father, no siblings. She was alone in the world. Then came her mother's elder sister, Tina. Tina arrived at the burial with her gold earrings dangling and her fine clothes smelling of expensive perfume. She barely shed a tear for her sister. Instead, she eyed Sandra up and down before letting out a loud sigh. "Sandra will follow me to the city. I will take care of my sister's only child. She needs to go to a good school. She cannot stay here alone," she announced. The neighbors nodded in agreement. They believed Sandra was lucky to have an aunt willing to take her in, but Sandra had no idea that her life was about to become a living nightmare. That evening, as she left with her aunt, she looked back one last time at the small house where she had lived with her mother. She whispered, "Mama, I will be strong. I promise." Then she turned away, stepping into the unknown. When Sandra stepped into her aunt's house, her small heart thumped with nervous excitement. The house was enormous compared to the tiny mud house she had lived in with her mother. The walls were painted a bright white, and the floor was covered with shiny tiles that reflected the light from the chandelier above. Everything smelled fresh and expensive. Her aunt, Tina, smiled at her as she led her inside. "Welcome to your new home, Sandra," she said warmly, placing a hand on the little girl's shoulder. "This is where you'll be staying from now on. You're part of this family now." Sandra's lips trembled with emotion. She had lost her mother, and the pain still clung to her like a heavy chain. But maybe, just maybe, her aunt truly meant well. Maybe she had found a new home. Tina's 3 children, Paul, Blessed, and Godwin, stood in the living room, watching her with curious eyes. Paul, the eldest, was about 12, Blessed was 10, and Godwin, the youngest, was just 5. "This is your cousin, Sandra," Tina introduced her. "She will be staying with us from now on." Paul frowned slightly but said nothing. Blessed looked her up and down before shrugging. Godwin, the smallest of them all, tilted his head. "She looks poor," he muttered innocently. Tina shot him a sharp look, and he immediately fell silent. She turned to Sandra and gave her another warm smile. "Don't mind them," she said. "Come, let me show you your room." Sandra followed eagerly, her heart swelling with relief. Maybe things were not as bad as she feared. Her mother had always told her that her Auntie Tina was a wicked woman, but right now things were different. Maybe she would truly be treated as part of the family. Tina led her down the hallway and stopped in front of a door. She opened it, revealing a small but neat room. It had a tiny bed, a wooden chair, and a single window with faded curtains. It wasn't luxurious, but compared to the floor she had slept on in the village, it was more than enough. You'll be staying here, Tina said. Go and freshen up. Dinner will soon be ready. Sandra's heart soared with gratitude. Thank you, Auntie, she muttered. Tina patted her head. You're a good girl. That night, Sandra ate dinner with the family. For the first time since her mother died, she felt warmth, real warmth. The food was delicious, the house was beautiful, and her aunt seemed kind. Maybe life in the city would not be so bad after all. But as the days turned into weeks, the warmth in her aunt's eyes began to fade. At first, it was little things. Sandra, sweep the living room before you eat, Tina would say, her voice still soft but firm. Sandra, wash the plates before you go to bed. Sandra, polish Paul's shoes. Sandra obeyed without complaint. After all, it was normal to help out in a family. But slowly, the requests turned into demands. Sandra, wake up earlier and mop the floors before everyone wakes up. Sandra, fetch water and fill all the buckets before cooking breakfast. Sandra, you will eat after everyone else has eaten. One evening, as Sandra sat watching Paul, Blessed, and Godwin do their homework, she gathered the courage to ask, Auntie, when will I start school? Tina scoffed. School? Who will pay your fees? Do you think money grows on trees? Sandra's heart sank. But you promised. Tina's eyes darkened. Do you dare question me? Sandra quickly shook her head, but the truth settled in her heart. She was not brought to the city to be part of the family. She was here to serve them. Her mother was right after all. And so, her suffering began. Sandra's days started before dawn. While her cousins slept peacefully under warm blankets, she was already up, sweeping the compound, fetching water, and preparing breakfast. By the time the sun rose, she would have scrubbed the floors, washed the dishes, and ironed clothes. If she finished early, Tina would find something else for her to do. Did you think you would sit and rest? Tina would snap. Lazy girl, go and wash the bathrooms. There was never a day off, never a moment of peace. The first time her aunt hit her, Sandra was too shocked to cry. It was early in the morning just before sunrise. Sandra had overslept by a few minutes, exhausted from scrubbing the kitchen the night before. When Tina entered the room and saw her still lying on the bed, she exploded with rage. You lazy, useless girl, she screamed, grabbing a wooden spoon from the kitchen counter. Before Sandra could even get up, the spoon landed on her back with a loud thwack. Sandra gasped in pain, her small body curling into itself. You think you came here for enjoyment? Tina hissed. Thwack, thwack. Another 2 strikes, harder this time. Get up. Go and fetch water before I break your legs. Sandra scrambled out of the bed, her heart racing with fear. She ran to the kitchen, picked up the heavy bucket, and rushed outside to fetch water from the public tap down the street. Her back burns her from the beating, but she did not dare complain. That was just the beginning. Food became a privilege, not a right. At first, Tina allowed Sandra to eat with the family, but soon, that kindness disappeared. Sandra, eat in the kitchen. Tina ordered one night. Sandra thought it was just for that night, but the rule never changed. While Paul, Blessed, and Godwin sat at the dining table eating, steaming plates of rice and fried chicken, Sandra sat on the kitchen floor, eating old spoiled soup and Gary. And sometimes there was nothing left for her to eat. Why are you looking at the pot like that? Blessed sneered one night when Sandra stood silently, staring at the pot. Did you think that we would keep food for you? I haven't eaten since morning, Sandra said, her voice barely above a breath. Paul laughed cruelly. Then drink water and sleep, he mocked. Blessed tossed a dirty bone at Sandra's feet. Here, lick that. Tina, who had overheard everything, did nothing. She simply adjusted her headscarf and continued scrolling through her phone. So Sandra learned how to starve. Some nights, the hunger was so bad that she chewed on raw Gary, swallowing it dry because there was no sugar, no milk, nothing to soften the taste. Other times, she would wait until the family was asleep and crept into the kitchen, searching for leftovers. But one night, she was caught. Paul woke up to get a drink of water and saw Sandra eating a small price of cold yam from the pot. You thief, he shouted, waking the entire house. Before Sandra could explain, Tina stormed in. "You are stealing food now?" She shrieked. "You want to kill us in our own house?" Sandra shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I was hungry, Auntie. I haven't eaten since morning." But her words meant nothing. Tina grabbed her by the ear and dragged her outside. "Since you like stealing food, you will sleep outside today. I don't want a thief in my house," she declared. Before Sandra could protest, the door slammed shut in her face. She stood in the cold, barefoot and trembling. The night air was sharp, the ground hard beneath her feet. She curled into a corner of the veranda, hugging herself for warmth. Tears slid down her cheeks, but she made no sound. She had learned that crying changed nothing. That wasn't her first time sleeping outside, and she knew it wouldn't be the last. Every mistake led to punishment. One morning, Sandra accidentally broke a plate while washing dishes. The sound of shattering porcelain echoed through the kitchen. Tina rushed in. "You clumsy fool," she shouted. "Do you know how much that plate costs?" I didn't mean to," Sandra stammered, her eyes wide with fear. Tina's face twisted with anger. "Pick it up." Sandra bent down, her fingers trembling as she collected the broken pieces. "Hurry up," Tina snapped. A sharp piece of ceramic sliced Sandra's finger, and she winced as blood welled up. But Tina did not care. "Clean that up too." Sandra wrapped her bleeding finger in her skirt and obeyed. Pain became her shadow, following her everywhere. Sandra tried to make friends with other children on the street, but they avoided her. "She always wears the same dirty dress," some said. "She smells like smoke and soap," others sneered. Even when she smiled at them, they turned away. Alone and unwanted, Sandra stopped trying. She did not hope for kindness anymore. She did not expect love. She blamed no one but death. She simply woke up each day, did her work, and went to bed. And in her heart, she believed this was all her life would ever be. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, months into years. By the time Sandra turned 15, she had learned to live without hope. She had stopped asking questions. She no longer wondered if her life would ever change. She did not dream anymore. She existed. That was all. Her body had adjusted to hunger. She knew how to ignore the sharp pangs in her stomach when she was given nothing to eat. Her hands had grown rough and calloused from endless scrubbing. The softness of childhood had been stripped from her fingers, replaced with the hands of a laborer. She had only 2 pairs of clothes, one for the house and one for the market. Her shoes had holes in them. Her hair was never cut neatly. She looked nothing like the cousins she served. One day, as she returned from the market carrying heavy bags, a group of boys from the neighborhood stopped her. "Look at her," one of them sneered. "She looks like a beggar." Another laughed. "Are you even a girl? Look at your hair. Who will ever marry you?" Sandra clutched the bags tightly, her head down, trying to move past them. But Paul had heard their laughter. He was standing at the gate. Instead of defending her, he laughed with them. "She is just a house girl," he said. "She is good for nothing." The boys laughed louder. Sandra felt something break inside her. But she did not cry. She simply walked into the house, put down the bags, and continued with her work. She was used to it. She was used to being nothing. That night, as she lay on the cold floor, she finally allowed herself to pray. "God," she whispered, staring at the dark ceiling, "if this is how my life will be forever, take me away." She was tired. Tired of hunger. Tired of pain. Tired of being treated like she did not matter. But there was no answer. Only silence. So she closed her eyes and waited for another day to come. Another day of suffering. Another day of being nobody. And in her heart, she wondered, would her life ever change? Sandra woke up before dawn, as she did every morning. She did not need an alarm clock. Her body had been trained by years of suffering to wake up before the first cock crew. She sat up slowly, feeling the ache in her bones from sleeping on the hard kitchen floor. The cold had seeped into her skin overnight, stiffening her muscles. But she did not have the luxury of stretching or lying back down. She had work to do. She reached for the small bucket of water she had fetched the night before, splashed some on her face, and wiped herself down with an old piece of cloth. There was no need for a proper bath. It was not like she had anywhere important to go. She tied a faded scarf around her head and walked out quietly. The house was still dark. The air was cold, but Sandra knew that within an hour, the house would be full of noise. The sound of Tina shouting at her children to wake up, Paul and Blessed arguing over whose uniform looked better, Godwin complaining about his shoes. She had to finish her chores before then. She moved quickly. First, she swept the entire house, making sure to pick up even the tiniest pieces of dirt, because if Tina saw anything out of place, there would be trouble. Then she mopped the floors, scrubbing the tiles until they shone. She hurried to the kitchen next, starting the fire in the hearth and preparing breakfast. By the time she had finished, her hands were already blackened with soot, her feet sore from standing too long. Her heart had learned to remain silent. No matter how much she hurt, no matter how unfair the punishments were, she did not cry. She had realized that tears changed nothing. If she cried, Tina would mock her dead mother. If she complained, Paul and Blessed would laugh. If she got tired, she would still be forced to work. So she swallowed everything, the hunger, the pain, the loneliness. By now, everyone in the neighborhood recognized her, not because they knew her name, but because she was the girl always seen carrying heavy loads from the market, struggling with sacks of rice, yams, and vegetables. She was the one who always smelled of detergent and charcoal smoke, her hands blackened from scrubbing pots, her feet dusty from walking long distances barefoot. She is always working, some neighbors murmured, shaking their heads. Is she their maid or their relative? I heard that she is Tina's niece, someone said. Then why does she look like a slave? But no one interfered. People noticed, but no one helped. Sandra knew that no one would save her. It did not matter how hard she worked. It was never enough. If Blessed misplaced his school books, Tina would say, Sandra, where did you put them? If Paul stained his white uniform, Tina would say, Sandra, why didn't you wash his clothes properly? If the food was not ready exactly on time, Tina would snap, What have you been doing all day? You are useless. One evening, after a long day of work, Sandra sat on the floor in the corner of the kitchen, her body aching. She had just finished washing the plates, but her feet hurt so badly that she needed a moment to rest. Paul walked in and saw her sitting. Lazy girl, he muttered, resting when there is still work to do. There is nothing left to do, Sandra said softly. Paul picked up a glass of water and poured it on the floor. There, he smirked. Now mop it. Sandra stared at him, her lips trembling, but she said nothing. She picked up the mop and cleaned the floor again. This was her life. At night, when the whole house was asleep, Sandra lay on the cold tiles of the kitchen, curled up like a child in the womb. At first, Tina had allowed her to sleep on a thin mat, but over time, even that was taken away. She is not a guest, Tina had said. Let her sleep where she belongs. The kitchen floor became her bed. The sound of rats scurrying at night became her lullaby. The cold became her blanket. And yet, she never complained. She simply closed her eyes and prayed for the night to pass quickly. Tina's children grew more cruel as the years passed. Paul, Blessed, and Godwin wore the best clothes, their shoes always polished, their hair neatly trimmed. They went to school with packed lunches, their backpacks filled with new textbooks and writing materials. Sandra, on the other hand, wore the same faded dresses over and over again. But there was no time to rest. She climbed the stairs and knocked softly on Tina's bedroom door. Ma, she said hesitantly, the bath water is ready. Tina did not respond. She never did. She only acknowledged Sandra's presence when she had something to complain about. Sandra turned away and knocked on the doors of the children's rooms. Paul, Blessed, Godwin, she called, it's time to wake up. Paul opened his door and stared at her with sleepy eyes. You again? He muttered. Sandra ignored him. She was used to it. She walked back downstairs, waiting for the next round of orders. When Tina and the children finally came downstairs, they sat at the dining table, enjoying the breakfast Sandra had prepared. Pancakes, scrambled eggs, hot chocolate. Sandra stood at a corner, watching them eat. Her stomach rumbled. She had been awake since dawn, working nonstop, and yet she was not allowed to sit with them. She would eat whatever was left after they were done. If there was anything left at all. Why are you standing there? Tina snapped. Go and wash the clothes. Sandra turned away without a word, heading for the backyard where a pile of dirty clothes was waiting for her. The sun was rising now, casting a golden glow over the compound. Sandra bent down and started scrubbing, her hands moving quickly, her mind numb. She was exhausted, but she had no choice. She had never had a choice. The cane came down on her back, hard, sharp, merciless. 1 stroke, 2, 3. Sandra clenched her teeth, refusing to scream. 4, 5, 6. Her skin burned, but she did not make a sound. Tina finally stopped, breathing heavily. Next time, she hissed, when something is missing, you better return it before you are accused. Sandra remained on her knees, her back on fire, her heart heavy. Blessed smirked and walked away. Much later, Paul found the missing pin inside his own bag, but no one apologized, because no one cared. That night, Sandra lay on the kitchen floor, her back throbbing from the beating, her stomach empty because she had been given no dinner. She turned to face the wall, closing her eyes, willing herself not to cry. But this time, the tears came. Silent, hot. They ran down her face, soaking the dirty scarf tied around her head. She thought of her mother, the woman who had once held her, kissed her forehead, and told her she was loved. Where was her mother now? Could she see what was happening? Did she know that her daughter was being treated like a dog? By her own sister. Sandra wiped her tears quickly. There was no use crying. No one could save her. She was alone. She had always been alone. And so, as the house slept peacefully, Sandra remained awake, staring into the darkness, wondering if life would always be this way. The next morning, Sandra's body ached so much that she almost did not wake up in time. But she did. She always did. The habit of waking before dawn was buried deep in her bones. Even when pain made movement unbearable, she pulled herself up from the hard kitchen floor, her back still burning from the cane marks Tina had left the previous day. She stretched slightly, wincing as the wounds protested. She moved slowly, like an old woman trapped in a young girl's body. But no one cared. She was not allowed to be tired. She was not allowed to feel pain. Her job was to work. And so, she worked. She cooked breakfast for the family, just as she did every day. The aroma of eggs and freshly baked bread filled the air, making her stomach twist in hunger. She swallowed hard and continued cooking. By the time she had finished, Tina and the children were already at the table, waiting. Sandra placed the dishes in front of them and stepped back, watching as they ate, laughing and talking about things that did not concern her. Not once did anyone look in her direction. She was invisible. When they finished, she cleared the plates, wiping off crumbs from the table. The leftovers were always thrown away, never given to her. It was as if they preferred the food to rot rather than to feed her. And so, Sandra remained hungry. It was not the first time. It would not be the last. Later that morning, as Sandra was folding clothes in the backyard, Godwin ran outside, furious. "Mama!" he screamed. "Sandra stole my wristwatch." Sandra's hands froze. She had not touched anything. She had been outside all morning, working. Before she could defend herself, Tina was already storming toward her. "You little thief," she hissed. Before Sandra could open her mouth, a hard slap landed on her face. Her head snapped to the side. She tasted blood. "I didn't take anything," Sandra screamed, clutching her face. Tina's eyes burned with rage. "Shut up," she screamed. "You should be grateful that we took you in. And this is how you repay us? By stealing?" Sandra looked up at her, blinking back tears. "I didn't steal," she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. Tina raised her hand again, ready to strike. But before she could, Paul came running outside, holding up the wristwatch. "Mama," he said, breathing hard. "I found it under Godwin's bed." A long silence followed. Tina's hand remained in the air. She slowly turned to face Godwin, whose face had turned pale. Sandra stared at the ground, her cheek still burning from the slap. Tina lowered her hand. Without an apology, without a single word, she turned around and walked back inside. Sandra was left standing there, her heart heavier than ever. Sandra lay on the cold floor, her body curled up tightly. She wanted to disappear, to close her eyes and wake up somewhere else, somewhere where love existed, somewhere where she was not a slave in her own family. But dreams did not come for people like her. Only silence, only suffering. And so, she lay there, staring into the darkness, waiting for another day of pain to begin. The sun was beginning to set. Sandra hurried through the crowded market. A heavy basket of groceries balanced on her head. Her feet ached, her arms trembled from exhaustion, but she moved quickly. She had no choice. Tina had sent her to buy ingredients for dinner, and if she returned late, punishment awaited her. As she weaved through the crowd, avoiding carts and traders calling out their wares, her eyes remained on the ground. She had learned long ago that looking people in the eye often invited trouble. But then, something unexpected happened. A man, tall, well-dressed, and confident, stood at the edge of the street, his eyes fixed on her. He wasn't like the others who passed without a second glance. He was watching her intently, as if searching for something in her. Sandra noticed but quickly looked away. She had no time for strangers. She quickened her pace. But before she could move past him, he stepped in her way. "You," he said, his deep voice halting her movements. Sandra froze. Fear gripped her chest. Had she done something wrong? Had she accidentally bumped into him without realizing it? "I'm sorry, sir," she said quickly, keeping her head down. "I didn't mean—" "No, no," the man interrupted, shaking his head. "I've been looking for someone like you." Sandra's brow furrowed. She dared to lift her gaze slightly. "Me?" "Yes, you." The man studied her closely. "You look exactly like the character I need for my next movie." Sandra blinked. "A movie? What was he talking about?" I don't understand," she stammered. The man smiled. "I'm a filmmaker. My name is Hope, and I've been searching for someone real, someone who can truly embody the role of a maid in my next film. And you are perfect." Sandra's heart pounded. A filmmaker? A movie? She had heard about movies, of course. The rich kids in Tina's house watched them all the time. But never in her wildest dreams did she think she could be part of one. "You must be mistaken, sir," she said softly. "I'm not an actress." Hope laughed. "That's the best part. You don't need to act. You already live this life. You understand the pain, the struggle. You won't need to pretend. You'll simply be yourself." Sandra swallowed hard. Her mind raced. This had to be a joke, or maybe a trick. For as long as she had lived, no one had ever offered her an opportunity. No one had ever looked at her like she was worth anything. Why now? She shook her head. "I don't have time. I have to get back home." "Wait," Hope said, stepping closer. His voice was gentle now, understanding. "Listen, I know this is sudden, but I promise this could change your life. Just a few hours of your time. You don't even have to quit whatever it is you do. Just come and try. If you don't like it, you can walk away." Sandra hesitated. For years, she had obeyed, followed rules, and remained in the shadows. For the first time, someone was offering her something different. She looked down at the groceries in her hands. If she went with this man now, Tina would be furious. But then again, wasn't she always? Wasn't she always beaten, always starved, always treated as nothing? Would it make any difference? Sandra stood frozen, her hands gripping the basket of groceries, as if it was the only thing keeping her grounded. Was she really considering this? Her whole life had been predictable. Wake up before dawn, work until her body ached, endure insults, and survive on the scraps of others. And now, out of nowhere, this man was offering her something different. But was it real? She lifted her eyes to Hope, who was still watching her with the same intensity. His confidence unsettled her, but there was something in his gaze, something different from what she was used to. Most people looked at her with disgust, pity, or indifference. But he looked at her like she mattered, like she was more than a ragged maid in dirty clothes. A loud voice in her head screamed at her to say no, to run back home before Tina realized she was taking too long. But another, quieter voice whispered, "What if this is your chance?" Sandra took a shaky breath. If I come, what will I have to do?" she asked hesitantly. Hope smiled. "Nothing difficult. We're shooting a movie, and the role I have for you is a maid." Sandra blinked. A maid? That was all? She had been a maid her entire life. But why would someone pay to watch a maid story? "Why me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Hope tilted his head slightly, studying her. "Because you don't need to act. You already know what it feels like to be in that role. And people will believe you." Sandra's heart pounded. It sounded too good to be true. And yet, it was the first time someone had looked at her and seen something worth believing in. She swallowed hard. I have to get back home before my aunt gets angry," she said quickly, stepping back. Hope didn't try to stop her. He simply nodded. "I understand. But listen, we'll be shooting tomorrow at an old warehouse on Bridge Street. If you change your mind, come. Just for one scene. That's all I ask." Sandra hesitated for a moment longer, then turned and hurried away, gripping her basket tight. That night, she lay on the cold floor, unable to sleep. Her mind was restless, playing out 1,000 possibilities. If Tina found out, the punishment would be unbearable. But what if this was her only chance? Her only escape? She turned over, staring at the ceiling. For 10 years, she had lived like this, waking up every morning with no hope that life could ever change. Was she really going to let fear keep her here forever? As the hours dragged on, her decision became clearer. Tomorrow, for the first time in her life, she was going to take a risk. The house was eerily silent. For the first time in a long while, Sandra stood in the middle of the sitting room, without the sound of Tina's harsh voice or the sharp insults of her children ringing in her ears. Tina had gone to the market, blessed, and the other children had left for school. This was her moment. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the door. Her heart pounded like a drum against her ribcage. She could still hear the voices of fear whispering in her mind. What if someone sees you? What if you get caught? What if they come back early? She took a deep breath. This was not the time to be afraid. She had already made her decision. Carefully, she stepped out of the house, pulling the door shut behind her. She adjusted the scarf on her head and hurried toward the main road. Her steps were quick but calculated. She couldn't afford to look suspicious. She kept her head down, avoiding the curious stares of passers-by who recognized her as Tina's maid. But today, she wasn't just a maid. Today, she was stepping into something bigger. As she walked, her thoughts raced. Would Hope still be there? Would the film crew accept her? Was she making a terrible mistake? She shook her head. There was no turning back now. The only thing she could do was move forward. Sandra arrived at the old warehouse, her heart still hammering in her chest. She saw them immediately, the crew setting up cameras, actors rehearsing lines, and Hope giving instructions. She hesitated at the entrance, suddenly feeling out of place. Maybe this wasn't meant for her. Maybe she should turn back. But before she could convince herself to leave, Hope spotted her. A wide grin spread across his face, and he waved her over. "You actually came," he said, his voice filled with excitement. Sandra managed a small nod. I don't know if I can do this," she admitted quietly. Hope studied her for a moment, then smiled. "You've already been doing it your whole life," he said. "You just didn't know people were watching." His words sent a strange warmth through Sandra's chest. Could it be true? Could it be that all the suffering, all the years of pain, were preparing her for something greater? Before she could dwell on the thought, the director called her over. "Let's see what you've got, Sandra," he said, handing her a script. Sandra took a deep breath, staring at the words on the paper. The role was simple: a maid, mistreated by her employers, struggling to find happiness. She didn't need to act. She had lived this story. As the cameras rolled, she stepped into the scene. And for the first time in her life, she was more than just a maid. She was a star in the making. Sandra had never experienced anything like this before. As soon as the cameras started rolling, everything around her disappeared. The bright lights, the busy crew, The director's focused stare. None of it mattered. She was in her element. The scene was intense. She was playing the role of a maid, a girl who was constantly insulted, beaten, and overworked. A girl who knew nothing but suffering. It was too easy. The pain she portrayed wasn't just acting. It was real. When the director shouted cut, the entire set fell silent. For a few moments, nobody moved. Then, suddenly, applause erupted. The crew members clapped. Some whispered to one another, shaking their heads in disbelief. Even the director, a man known for his strict and unforgiving attitude, stared at Sandra with admiration. "Where did you say you found this girl?" he asked Hope, still watching Sandra as if she were a miracle. Hope grinned. "I told you she's special." Sandra's heart pounded. Did they really think she was good? The director finally walked up to her. "Sandra," he said, his voice serious, "how long have you been acting?" Sandra hesitated. Acting? She had never even dreamed of such a thing. I've never acted before," she admitted softly. The director's eyebrows shot up. "Never?" She shook her head. The man laughed, shaking his head in amazement. "Unbelievable. You just gave one of the most powerful performances I've seen in years." Sandra couldn't believe her ears. Her? Powerful? For the first time in her life, someone was praising her. Not for how well she cleaned the house or how obedient she was, but for something she had done for herself. Her chest tightened, and tears stung her eyes. She had spent years feeling worthless, but now, for the first time, she felt seen. Blessed placed a hand on her shoulder. "You were amazing, Sandra," he said warmly. "You have a gift." A gift. No one had ever told her that before. The director clapped his hands together. "All right, everyone. Let's continue. Sandra, you're staying with us for more scenes." Sandra blinked. "More scenes?" She echoed. "Of course," the director said. "You're a natural. I want you to be in more projects." Sandra's lips parted in shock. Could this really be happening? For years, she had been nothing but a maid, an invisible shadow in someone else's home. Now, people were calling her special. Now, they were asking her to stay. Tears welled up in her eyes. Sandra's heart raced as she made her way home. She had stayed longer than expected. The excitement of being on set, the overwhelming joy of hearing people praise her talent. It had made her lose track of time. Now, the sun was beginning to set, and she knew Tina would be back from the market. As she approached the house, she wiped her hands nervously on her dirty dress. No one could know where she had been. Taking a deep breath, she pushed the door open and stepped inside. Tina was in the kitchen, unpacking the groceries. Blessed and the other children were gathered in the sitting room, watching a movie on the large flat-screen TV. No one seemed to notice her arrival. Sandra let out a quiet sigh of relief. She quickly dropped the market bags and hurried to her small corner in the house, pretending as if nothing had happened. But deep inside, she was still shaking. She had gotten away with it this time, but for how long? The days that followed were a blur of secrecy and excitement. Every time Tina went to the market and the children left for school, Sandra would sneak out and join the film crew. She memorized her lines effortlessly. She performed each scene with raw emotion. The more she acted, the more the director and the crew adored her. News about her talent spread quickly. Producers started asking about the mysterious girl with the natural acting skills. Hope told her that people were already talking about her performance, even though the movie hadn't been released yet. But Sandra couldn't let herself be carried away. She knew her life was still not her own. Every time she returned home, she was still the same girl with torn clothes and a body covered in bruises. She was still Tina's maid. She was still nothing. Or so she thought. Sandra was on set, acting a particularly emotional scene. It was a moment where the maid in the movie was being mistreated by her employer, forced to kneel and scrub the floor while the rich children laughed at her. As she acted, real tears fell from her eyes. The pain, the humiliation, it was all too real. When the director shouted cut, the entire crew went silent. Some had tears in their own eyes. Others were just staring at Sandra as if she were a miracle. The director walked up to her, his voice filled with admiration. "Sandra, do you know what you just did?" She wiped her tears and shook her head. You just gave the greatest performance of the year, he said. The entire country is going to know your name. Sandra blinked in shock. Me? Yes, you, Hope chimed in, smiling. Your life is about to change forever. Sandra swallowed hard. She had spent her whole life being told she was worthless. But now, was she finally becoming someone? That evening, Sandra returned home as usual. But something felt different. Tina's expression was colder than usual. Blessed and the other children weren't their usual loud, carefree selves. Something was wrong. Then, Tina turned to her, her eyes sharp. Where have you been? Sandra's heart stopped. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Tina stepped closer, her face twisted with suspicion. You think I don't notice? You leave this house every time I go to the market. Where do you go, Sandra? Sandra's throat went dry. Has she been caught? Was this the end? Tina's lips curled into a sneer. You better start talking before I make you regret it. Sandra's hands clenched into fists. She had spent years living in fear, years accepting the punishments, the insults, the pain. But today, she wasn't the same girl anymore. Something inside her had changed. She took a deep breath, and for the first time in her life, she lifted her chin and looked Tina straight in the eyes. I want to act in a movie. A heavy silence filled the room. Blessed gasped. The other children stared in shock. Tina's face darkened with rage. You did what? She hissed. Sandra's heart pounded, but she stood her ground. I acted in a movie, she repeated, and I'm going to be famous. Tina's nostrils flared. You ungrateful wretch! She screamed, raising her hand. But before she could strike Sandra, the door burst open. And what happened next changed everything. The door slammed open, and a wave of silence filled the room. Everyone turned in shock. A tall man dressed in a black designer suit stepped inside. His presence alone commanded attention. His eyes, sharp and unreadable, scanned the room until they landed on Sandra. Hope. Sandra's breath caught in her throat. Why was he here? Tina, still frozen in anger, blinked in confusion. Who are you? She demanded. Hope ignored her. His gaze remained locked on Sandra, his expression unreadable. Get your things, he said. You're leaving. A deafening silence followed. Sandra's eyes widened. What? Tina's face twisted in shock. What do you mean she's leaving? Who are you? Hope finally turned to Tina, his voice dangerously calm. I'm the reason your so-called maid is about to become a national sensation, he said. I'm the producer of the movie she's in, and I'm here to take her away. Sandra's heart pounded. This was really happening. Tina's face turned red with rage. You have no right. She belongs here. She is my niece. I am her only relative. Hope scoffed. Belongs? Your niece or your maid? He turned to Sandra. Tell me, Sandra, do you belong here? Sandra swallowed hard. For years, she had lived under Tina's control. For years, she had been beaten, starved, and treated like nothing. Now, she had a choice. Her fingers trembled as she turned to Tina, her voice shaking but firm. No, she whispered, then louder. I don't belong here. I am not her niece. Tina's body went stiff. The children gasped. Sandra lifted her chin. I'm leaving. Tina let out a bitter laugh. And where do you think you'll go? Do you think you can survive without me? Sandra's eyes met Hope's. Yes, she said. I can. Tina's rage exploded. You ungrateful little. But before she could finish, Hope stepped forward. Try to touch her again, he said coldly, and I will make sure you regret it for the rest of your life. You and your children are supposed to be in jail for everything you did to this innocent girl. Tina flinched. For the first time, she looked afraid. Sandra turned without another word and walked toward the door. Her hands trembled as she stepped outside. The air felt different, lighter. She was free, truly free. She turned to Hope, tears in her eyes. Thank you. He smiled. Don't thank me yet. This is just the beginning. Sandra wiped her eyes and took a deep breath. Her new life had just begun. Sandra sat in the back seat of the luxurious black car as it sped through the city streets. Everything felt surreal. For 10 years, she had known nothing but suffering. Now, she was leaving that life behind. She glanced at Hope, who was making calls, arranging meetings, talking about her like she was the most important person in the world. Could this really be happening? She clenched her hands together, afraid that at any moment she would wake up and find herself back in Tina's house, scrubbing the floors. But then the car stopped in front of a large building. A film studio. "Welcome to your new life," Hope said with a smile. Months passed, and Sandra's world changed completely. The movie she had acted in was released, and within days, it became the most talked about film in the country. People couldn't stop praising her performance. Who is she? Where did she come from? She acts like she has lived the role. Offers from top producers flooded in. Everyone wanted her. She went from wearing rags to dressing in elegant clothes. From eating leftovers to dining in five-star restaurants. She was no longer just a maid. She was a star. On the night of the movie premiere, she stood on the red carpet, flashing cameras surrounding her, reporters calling her name. "Sandra, how does it feel to be the most sought-after actress in the country?" She smiled, but deep inside, she felt a lump in her throat. How could she explain it? How could she put into words what this moment meant to her? So, she simply whispered, "It feels like a dream." One evening, as Sandra sat in her beautiful home, there was a knock on the door. She opened it and froze. Tina, her once proud, arrogant aunt, now looked desperate. Behind her stood Blessed and the other children, their luxurious lives seemingly gone. "Sandra," Tina whispered, forcing a smile. "My dear, look how beautiful you've become." Sandra said nothing. Tina cleared her throat, shifting uncomfortably. "Life has been hard since you left. We had some financial struggles. I thought maybe you could help us." Sandra studied her for a long moment. Memories of the beatings, the hunger, the insults, all of it flashed through her mind. "You used to say I was good for nothing," she said quietly. Tina swallowed hard. You used to tell me I would never amount to anything." Tina's eyes dropped. "Sandra, please." A part of her wanted revenge. A part of her wanted to throw them out, to let them suffer the way she had suffered. But she wasn't Tina. She would never be like Tina. She took a deep breath. "I forgive you," she said. Tina's eyes lit up. "Oh, thank you. Does that mean?" "But you are not my family," Sandra interrupted. "Not anymore." Tina's face fell. "I will not help you," Sandra continued. "Go and learn what it means to build your own life, the way I had to build mine." And with that, she closed the door. For the first time in her life, she was in control. Years later, Sandra became one of the greatest actresses in the country. She built a foundation to help young girls like herself, girls who had been mistreated, abused, and abandoned. She used her story to inspire others. And one day, while standing in front of thousands of people, she smiled and said, "I was once told I was nothing, but now I am everything I was meant to be." The crowd erupted in applause. Sandra had not only survived, she had won. Hello, champions. I hope you enjoyed the stories. Please hit the like button, leave a comment below, and subscribe to our channel. Thanks. The end. Tina's eyes lit up. "Oh, thank you. Does that mean?" "But you are not my family," Sandra interrupted. "Not anymore." Tina's face fell. "I will not help you," Sandra continued. "Go and learn what it means to build your own life, the way I had to build mine." And with that, she closed the door. For the first time in her life, she was in control. Years later, Sandra became one of the greatest actresses in the country. She built a foundation to help young girls like herself, girls who had been mistreated, abused, and abandoned. She used her story to inspire others. And one day, while standing in front of thousands of people, she smiled and said, "I was once told I was nothing, but now I am everything I was meant to be." The crowd erupted in applause. Sandra had not only survived, she had won. Hello, champions. I hope you enjoyed the stories. Please hit the like button, leave a comment below, and subscribe to our channel. Thanks. The end.